Well, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us during a very serious moment in our country. And I first have to just say that I share my deep sorrow and anger, frankly, about the horror that happened yesterday in Texas after one horror after another. 19 children, 2 teachers murdered in an elementary school 2 days before summer break was set to start. So we owe these grieving families and every other grieving family around the country to act to stop this. I'm so appreciative of our leader, Majority Leader Schumer, in leading us in moving forward in this. All we need is for Republican members of the Senate to find the tiniest bit of courage and join us. And courage is what we're talking about today. It's something that we all need to have when we have courageous elected officials we're hearing from today who are standing strong against attempts to roll back 50 years of women's freedom to make our own healthcare decisions. If Roe v. Wade is overturned by the Supreme Court, it will have grave, grave consequences for women across our country. This is especially true in my home state of Michigan. If Roe v. Wade falls, Michigan goes back to a 1931 law that makes abortion at any stage a felony with no exceptions for rape and incest. And we will soon hear from my governor, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who's fighting and really leading us to prevent this law from going into effect and harming Michigan women. But it's not just women in Michigan, as we know. Wisconsin would revert back to the law from 1849, and at least 17 states would ban abortions with no exceptions for rape and incest. This issue all comes down to who should make decisions about your healthcare. MAGA Republican politicians, right-wing members of the Supreme Court, or you. Democrats stand with women across the country who deserve the freedom to make our own healthcare decisions. Now I want to welcome our leader who has been steadfast on standing up for reproductive freedom and working with all of us to make sure we can do everything humanly possible to be able to protect a woman's right to make her own reproductive choices. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you for putting this together. Debbie is head of our Democratic PCC, our DPCC, and does an amazingly good job. Thank you, and I thank my other colleagues, Senator Murray, who's been our leader on this issue for decades, Senator Klobuchar, Senator Baldwin, and I don't know if I'm missing any of my other colleagues here. And I certainly thank our guests for their strength and courage in fighting back against these attacks on abortion access, and for joining us to share their on-the-ground perspectives on the battle to preserve women's rights. I want to take a brief moment, as Debbie did, to acknowledge the massacre of innocent second, third, and fourth graders and their teachers in Uvalde, Texas yesterday. We're all outraged, we're heartbroken, we're stunned. I woke up at 3 a.m. thinking, what if this happened to my little grandson, 3 years old? And every one of us has had thoughts like that. We're stunned at our Republican colleagues' ability to look tragedy, overwhelming tragedy in the eye and refuse to act. The Senate will vote on gun safety legislation. We can start as soon as tomorrow if Republicans let us proceed on the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act. We need 10 of their votes, which would directly address racially motivated shootings like the one we saw in my home state of New York and Buffalo. And I repeat, though, we are going to vote on gun legislation. We hope Republicans will join us, even though they have never in the past. We're going to try. Chris Murphy's leading that effort. The American people are tired of silence, tired of the kind words offering thoughts and prayers. And Senate Democrats, we want good, strong legislation that has bipartisan support. But if Republicans refuse to join us, we'll continue to pursue gun safety legislation on our own. We owe that to our children and grandchildren. Now, on the issue of today. Since the draft SCOTUS decision became public, the American people have seen a stark contrast between Democrats and MAGA Republicans on abortion. In recent weeks, Republicans have revealed their plan for an all-out assault on women's rights. Mitch McConnell, the Senate Minority Leader, said that a national ban on abortions is, quote, possible if Republicans retake the Senate. In Oklahoma, their new 6-week abortion ban doesn't even include exceptions for rape or incest. In Florida, incoming legislators are already planning a total ban on abortion. These MAGA Republicans are just extremists, and you can see that in their proposals. On the other hand, 2 weeks ago, the American people saw Democrats fighting to protect women's freedoms. Americans see state-level Democrats, like our guests here today, taking these unconstitutional restrictions to court and using their voices to uplift women and protect their rights. And we know that the American people are on our side. That's why even while Republicans pursue an all-out assault on abortion rights, Republican campaign committees are urging their candidates to avoid the subject because they know the public is overwhelmingly with us. And so, again, I want to thank our guests for being here, for everything they're doing at the state level. Keep it up. Between now and November, Americans are going to see the contrast between Democrats and Republicans again and again and again. Democrats won't stop fighting for a woman's right to make her own choices until we succeed. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, everybody. And I very much appreciate the opportunity to say a few words here.
Thank you so much, Chuck, and thank you for your incredible leadership on this. And now I want to introduce the members of our really outstanding panel today. I'll introduce all 4 of them and then ask each of them to say a few opening comments. Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, my home state. She has served as governor of Michigan since 2018. She's done an absolutely incredible job with many challenges with COVID and all of the other challenges that we have been facing. So proud of her. She was the first governor to file a lawsuit to protect abortion access following the leaked draft opinion. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, as I said, Michigan would revert back to a 1931 law in which abortion at any stage is a felony, with no exception for rape and incest. We're so pleased to have Attorney General Josh Kaul of Wisconsin with us. And Josh Kaul has served as the Attorney General for the state of Wisconsin since January 2019, doing a great job. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, Wisconsin will revert back to an 1849 law under which abortion is a felony. Attorney General Kaul has said that his Justice Department would not enforce the law. Missouri State Rep. Emily Weber, we are so glad you are with us. State Representative Emily Weber is the first Asian American woman to serve in the Missouri General Assembly. She has filed legislation to protect the freedoms of women in Missouri if Roe v. Wade is overturned. Missouri has a trigger law, meaning that if Roe v. Wade is overturned, nearly all abortions will be banned, with no exception for rape and incest, which I'm sure she will talk about. Oklahoma State Rep. A.J. Pittman. State Representative Pittman is the first millennial woman and the third Seminole to serve in the Oklahoma State Legislature. She serves on the Public Health Committee, which recently considered the harshest abortion restrictions in the country. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, Oklahoma will revert back to a 1910 law. So we are so appreciative of each of you taking the time to join us today. And I want to turn things over to Governor Whitmer.
Thank you, Senator Stabenow. And I have to thank Leader Schumer as well. We're very proud of both of our U.S. senators, Senator Stabenow and Senator Peters. We are well represented here in Michigan. So we know that with the release of the draft opinion in the Dobbs case, it confirmed, I think, what many of us who've been on the front line were fearing, the worst case scenario where Roe is completely overturned. In Michigan, as you, Senator Stabenow, beautifully surmised, we are to revert to a 1931 law that's been on the books, making it a felony without any exceptions. After 5 decades almost of women in Michigan having the full ability to make our own decision, informed decisions that are incredibly hard and incredibly personal and unique to the individual. We are now at threat of watching Michigan go from being a pro-choice state to one of having one of the most extreme laws in the country as soon as that decision is rendered. Michigan is not just a state where Michigan women get access to healthcare and reproductive support and medical care. It's a state where women from Ohio come to, women from Indiana come to as well. And so my team and I looked at what tools did we have to fight like hell and to protect this right for women. A number of lawsuits have been filed. I initiated a lawsuit using unique powers that I have as governor of Michigan to protect constitutional rights and to go straight to our Supreme Court. Planned Parenthood initiated their own lawsuit, and we have people out collecting signatures to amend our Constitution. We don't know which one of these might work, if any of them, but we are pulling out all of the stops. This isn't just about me and the rights that I've always had, because let's be honest, I'm not in the 2.2 million women who are of reproductive ability and age right now, but it's about my girls. And the thought that my girls and their generation may have fewer rights than we've always had, fewer abilities to make decisions. The most important economic decision a woman will make in her lifetime is whether and when to have a pregnancy, take a pregnancy to term. That's why this is so crucial. And that's why it's so stark what is happening here across our country. We are going to fight like hell to protect these rights. And I'm grateful that I'm grateful to be here, and I'm grateful to be in the company of so many folks that are on the front lines in other states as well.
Well, thank you so much, Governor Whitmer, and we are so appreciative that you are pulling out all of the stops. And so this is an all hands on deck moment, and thank you for everything you're doing. Somebody else who's pulling out all the stops is the Attorney General. Attorney General Carl, thank you so much, from another Great Lakes state in Wisconsin. And we are so appreciative of your being with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Senator Stabenow, and thank you to the other senators, to my fellow panelists, and especially thank you to Senator Baldwin. We are incredibly fortunate to have you representing Wisconsin, and are thankful for your leadership at both the national and state level on reproductive freedom issues and so many other issues as well. Wisconsin is in a similar situation to the one that Michigan faces. We have a 19th century ban on most abortions that remains on our statutes in Wisconsin. Now, there is some uncertainty as to whether that law would go into effect if Roe is struck down, but there certainly will be an argument made that it does go into effect, and I expect that we will see litigation over that issue. If it does, it would impose draconian restrictions on women in Wisconsin. It bans all abortions except for abortions that are necessary to save the life of the mother, and abortions, and it excludes the mother from the ban. And so if you think about what that means, it means that other than abortions to save the life of the mother, the only abortions that would be lawful in Wisconsin would be self-administered abortions. That is incredibly backwards and incredibly dangerous. And that's not the future that I think any of us wants to see for women in our state of Wisconsin. Even as that litigation I mentioned plays out, access to abortion in Wisconsin is going to effectively be restricted. And the reason for that is that Planned Parenthood, which currently is the abortion services provider in Wisconsin, has made clear that they're going to stop providing services because of the 19th century ban on the books and the possibility that their doctors could be prosecuted under that ban. And so what that would mean is that if Roe comes down that day, abortion services that are safe and legal will effectively end in the state of Wisconsin, at least until litigation plays out. And if that ban is found to be in effect, potentially until legislation is passed. There is no exception in our statute for cases of rape. There is no exception for cases of incest. And there's no exception to protect the health of the mother unless it's necessary to actually prevent the death of the mother. So this is an incredibly draconian situation that we could find ourselves in very soon here in the state of Wisconsin. As Senator Stabenow mentioned, I have committed not to use the resources of our State Department of Justice to investigate or prosecute any cases under that 19th century abortion ban. But that doesn't stop law enforcement agencies, police chiefs, sheriffs, and DAs from potentially pursuing cases under that ban. It's my hope that they will not do that. They have many, many far better things to be using their resources on than investigating cases involving violations of an old abortion ban. But it remains to be seen how that will play out. It is vital that we act on as many fronts as possible. And one of those, of course, is to have action at the congressional level. I know that the senators here tried to work to codify Roe at a national level, and those are critical efforts. I would also encourage the senators to consider other opportunities to protect access, whether it's through grant powers and conditions that are attached to spending, whether it's through protecting interstate travel for people who are seeking access to abortion, making sure that the mail system can be used, and then finally, making sure that if people can't access abortion services through medical professionals in their home state, that as many options are provided as possible to allow for access to medical professionals in other states through telemedicine or other means, and that those visits are reimbursed. The last thing I would say is that a court that is willing to throw out 2 generations of precedent and overturn a fundamental right that has also violated its norms regarding secrecy as this process has played out is a court that may very well not stop at overturning Roe versus Wade. And the role that we will play at the state level and the role that our elected representatives will play at the federal level is going to be critical to protecting our fundamental freedoms in the years and perhaps decades ahead. So thank you so much for all the work that you're doing, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Well, thank you so very much, Attorney General Call, and appreciate all of your suggestions too. We need to think very broadly right now about what we can do. And so thank you so much. We now want to hear from Missouri, State Representative Emily Weber. Thank you so much for your leadership, and we are anxious to hear from you about what's happening in Missouri.
Thank you, Senator, and all the other senators for giving us this opportunity to speak with you. I represent the Midtown downtown area of Kansas City, Missouri, and to give you an idea of what Missouri is like, it's a pro-birth state. Life begins at conception. We only have one clinic that is allowed to do abortions in our state, and that's in St. Louis. Here in Missouri, it is required to have anti-abortion in-person counseling, followed by a 72-hour waiting period for an abortion, to parental notification and consent, to a tiered system of stoppage and complete ban if Roe v. Wade is overturned, with no exceptions for rape or incest, and public and private insurance restrictions. Missouri is not a welcoming place for people seeking reproductive health care. This is not just in Missouri, of course, it's in the 17 states that are looking to go back to an abortion ban with no exceptions for rape or incest. So if Roe is overturned, so many lives are going to be lost. Abortion was here before Roe, and it will be here if Roe is overturned. The next attack on our reproductive health care will be on birth control. And here in Missouri, that's been happening, and we must do everything to protect our reproductive rights. Some of the anti-reproductive healthcare bills that have received the most attention this past session here in Missouri are defunding Planned Parenthood by eliminating Medicaid payments for any and all reproductive health, requirement to bury fetal remains post-abortion, Texas copycat bill, including $10,000 to anyone who wants to act as a state bounty hunter, threatening private universities' endowment if training in abortion care continues. A crime would be committed if you seek an abortion across state line. And at one point, we had a bill that stated if anyone had an ectopic pregnancy and used abortion medications to terminate the pregnancy, they could, and the person that helped them get the medications, could receive a felony charge and be sent to prison. So we have 163 seats in the Missouri House. This session, we had 19 bills listed that directly relate to abortion. 7 of those bills are pro-reproductive healthcare, and I sponsored 2 of those bills. One of the bills would require all organizations that provide pregnancy-related services or counseling to provide medically accurate and unbiased information about birth control, adoption, labor and delivery, postpartum care in order to be eligible to receive state funding. My other bills respect People's Abortions Decisions Act. The bill prohibits the state from denying a person's right to obtain an abortion as established by the United States Supreme Court in Roe v. Wade. This session, we did defeat a lot of these horrible bills that in Missouri, you all know, we have a trigger law that was passed in 2019 that would make abortion illegal if Roe is overturned. This is going to hurt our rural Missourians and the poor. And if Roe is overturned here in Missouri, a child that is raped by their uncle will not have an option for an abortion. Children shouldn't have to be forced to give birth. So here in Missouri, we're fighting, but we desperately need your help, and we need you to act now. So, we cannot let states attack Medicare and Medicaid, and we cannot continue to punch the poor. We need to find ways to desensitize states where they are trying to find trap laws and restrict access, and not only access to abortion, but access to birth control as well. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Representative Weber. You're in a very tough state and a tough situation, and you're very courageous, and we really appreciate that you're not giving up on this, and we're not going to give up on this. I mean, we're going to get through this, whether it's right this minute or whether it's the November election. We're going to get through this and make sure that women have the capacity to make our own reproductive health decisions. Oklahoma, we'd like to hear now from State Representative A.J. Pittman. Thank you so much for being with us, and another very tough state.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for having me. It is an honor to be here with you today, along with my distinguished colleagues and the rest of the panel. Representative Emily and I have been on a number of panels together over the course of this legislative session about this topic specifically. Oklahoma very much mirrors exactly what she said. I am fortunate enough to sit on the Public Health Committee and be on the front lines of these bills. I've been told in committee that my colleagues would rather be a slave than a dead baby to my face. And those are the comments that I face each and every day when I come to work. And so we are fighting so much here in the state of Oklahoma as we talk about healthcare rights, access to healthcare rights. Even though we're talking about abortion and Roe versus Wade being overturned, we don't even give access to adequate maternal health and infant mortality health. So if we are not caring about the mothers who are carrying these children full term, we say we are pro-life or we are pro-birth, but you're not helping the mothers who are losing their babies and sending them right back to work without any bereavement leave. That is what we are doing here in Oklahoma. And so we are now making stark rules and creating stark laws that will dramatically change the future of women in our state because they will have no access to abortions. We are changing the lives of practicing physicians because now they can have civil suits filed against them by people who are not even the father or the family member of the woman receiving the abortion. Those are the type of laws we are passing here in Oklahoma. And I fight as the minority of the minority of the minority. I am one of 19 Democrats. I am the youngest female serving in the state of Oklahoma. I am the only African-American, Native American to serve in the state legislature. I represent so many people in the state that are not represented on the House floor or in the Senate. These bills that we were passing were called a state of an emergency by the author of this bill. It's not a state of emergency to make sure our children are not hungry. It's not a state of emergency to fully fund education. It is not a state of emergency to keep our students safe in school, but it is a state of emergency to ban abortions. Those are the type of conversations that we are having in the state of Oklahoma. And so my solution is that I know that during this 2022 election cycle, the late of our legislature is not going to change for the better. My solution is that we have to have national help. We have to have national support. I would love to see a resource guide created through our U.S. Department of Health and Human Services that is passed down through the regional directors so that women know what states to go to, what nonprofits will help fund them, and where they can get transportation and who will support them. Because Oklahoma is not changing anytime soon, and it's going to take work. but I want to save lives now, today. I want to make sure that women are not self-inducing abortions without medical help. And in order to do that, that means we have to bring other resources into our state and not just rely on the people that were elected to serve and protect all that are not doing that oath. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So much coming at all of us and coming at women across the country. Appreciate all of you, and we want to open it up to our Senate colleagues that are with us. And I want to start with Senator Patty Murray, who has been for a long time our leader on reproductive choice issues. And Senator Murray, why don't you go ahead with your first questions?
Well, thank you so much, Debbie, for putting this together. Thank you all for coming and talking to us about the real impacts of what is about to hit everyone in this country and your work to advocate for the right to abortion. We are doing everything we can here in Congress to protect the right to abortion and fight back against these cruel agenda that we are seeing that will force women to stay pregnant. But I know that a lot of this fight is going to be in your states. So this is really helpful to us to know what we need to focus on the federal level and what the real fight's going to be. So thank you. Thank you for being here. I do have a couple questions because right now we're seeing Republicans across the country really go beyond just attacking abortion providers in their own states to attack medication abortion as well, trying to limit what Americans can receive in the mail or do in their own house. So I wanted to ask each one of you, is this a threat that you are seeing talked about in your states? And Governor Whitmer, maybe if I could ask you first.
Sure. Thank you, Senator Murray. Appreciate the question. You know, I veto all the ugly stuff that comes to my desk, whether it is attack on voting rights or it is attack on women's reproductive rights. And so, you know, there have been a lot of different bills that have been introduced and passed through a chamber and sent over to the other, but not headed to my desk because they know the fate of that. However, I do think that these efforts will continue, and there's no question that it reinforces how high the stakes are as we think about this upcoming election this fall. 100% of the people on the other side really are enthusiastic candidates in terms of people for this position are supporters of the 1931 law. And I think that tells you everything you need to know. My veto will continue to keep these efforts at bay, the threat of my veto, but this is a high stakes moment for our nation, and certainly the stakes couldn't get higher here in Michigan.
Attorney General Call, what about in Wisconsin?
Yeah, Wisconsin unfortunately already has laws regarding medication abortion. Our governor is committed to vetoing legislation that would further restrict access. But there certainly have been legislative efforts to impose new restrictions on access. And I mentioned how restrictive the old 19th century ban was before, but there's been discussion of legislative efforts to potentially try to make that even more restrictive, for example, by eliminating the protection for abortions to save the life of the mother. So although it's really deeply concerning what we may be facing the day that Roe comes down, it could be that we're seeing legislative efforts to even further restrict rights and limit reproductive freedom.
Representative Weber.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for asking it. Yes, 100%. We are seeing this. We saw it this past session. The ectopic pregnancy, the one that I mentioned while I was talking, that had a part of it was the medications that you received through the mail too. So we are seeing those 100%, and we will most likely see more of those.
Representative Pittman.
Thank you so much for the question. We currently have not seen that. However, we are in special session right now to discuss ARPA funds and our governor's authority to disperse those. And we feel that our Senate pro tem is going to try to slide one of those bills into our special legislative session in the next 2 days. However, this last bill that everyone has been talking about, HB 4327, does not directly attack that.
Okay, and Representative Pittman, I know that as soon as tomorrow, if not today, your governor is going to sign into the law the bill that effectively bans abortions in your state. And empowers your neighbors to sue neighbors. I mean, it's just stunning to me. And that was, I know, passed despite all of your hard work. Just describe for us what that means for women in your state.
Yes, ma'am. It is on his desk. He has not signed it yet. And you're exactly right. It mentions that you can sue anyone from your church, from your neighborhood. You can sue each other. And that for me says that we know he say, she said stuff happens all the time. There is gossip all the time. If you're thinking about young girls in school or in college, or people who have had an emergency, this could be someone who you don't know from any walk of life that just gets a whiff of what you've done in your personal life. And they then can bring a civil lawsuit against you, not a criminal. The bill is not criminal, it is civil, but they can bring a criminal lawsuit for you and what you do in your life, in your home, in the discussions that you have with your family, things that could personally protect your life without knowing your medical history, without knowing pre-existing conditions, without understanding your finances or your financial circumstances. They can do that. And in the bill, it says there's a section that the Senate added to the bill that says no court of this state shall have jurisdiction to consider any action that seeks to declarify relief to prevent a private individual from enforcing any provisions of this act. So you're basically saying no court, not even our Supreme Court in the state of Oklahoma, can take action to overturn this, or to take action to be able to tell someone that they cannot sue someone else for making a private decision for their own personal life. That is something.
Yeah, this sounds to me like we are freezing people from talking. You can't chat with your friends. You can't say, I was raped. You can't say, geez, this might have happened. I mean, you can't talk to anybody. This is just frightening to me.
No, ma'am. And we also have a law on the that was passed this legislative session to where you can sue the physician now too. So if you think about your primary physicians, if you think about your mental health professionals, if you think about those type of individuals, where do we have a safe space? Where are we creating this safe space for these women to be able to talk to someone, to be able to garner help, to be able to get advice? We are mostly now taking that completely away from them.
Even your own family members?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Just frightening. Debbie, thank you. I'll listen to the other questions. Thank you.
Absolutely. As I'm listening, Patty, and listening to responses, I keep thinking about our Republican colleagues that are always telling us that they don't support government regulation. And yet we are talking about for women, for healthcare providers, for everyone in this
mental
space.
Health, counselors, anybody. Yeah.
Yep. It's really, really frightening. Well, I want to ask Governor Whitmer. I know that you have a short time left with us. I'm so glad you're with us. You are doing a number of things to fight the Michigan law. And I wonder if you might just speak a little bit more about the kinds of things that you're doing, trying to push back on having this 1931 law take effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Senator Stabenow. And I will have to excuse myself after I reply to this question. We have been of the mindset that we have got to try to do everything we can here at the state level. We don't know where this is headed, but we do know what options we have in terms of fighting back. So I filed a lawsuit. I've taken it straight to our Supreme Court. They're now asking for us to brief a number of questions. Planned Parenthood filed a different lawsuit, got an injunction. We don't know if that will last, but that was a somewhat positive development. And we also are collecting signatures to take it right to the ballot. But another thing that I wanted to do was explore what could we do across state government. So today I signed an executive directive requiring that state departments identify and assess opportunities to increase protections for reproductive health care. All departments need to, 1, detail how they can increase choices available to protect residents' mental, physical, and reproductive health. 2, safeguard the privacy of individuals who are seeking care. And 3, assure the safety of reproductive health care providers. So additionally, we must provide information about the cost and availability of reproductive care, increase public awareness about contraception, and decline to cooperate or assist with any investigation or proceeding against anyone for accessing reproductive health care that is legal in Michigan right now. So we are using every tool available to me as governor, to us as state government, and working across with our allies. And we've got to pull out all the stops. And so I've encouraged my colleagues to take a similar tack in states, especially that would see such a dramatic change in policy and access for women to have reproductive care, because abortion is health care.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We're very grateful. So
Thank you.
Let me turn it to Senator Tammy Baldwin, who is a tremendous champion on this issue. Senator Baldwin.
Let me unmute. Very good. Thank you so much, Senator Stabenow, for convening us. And I'm really grateful to our panelists today. And I want to ask Attorney General Call a couple of questions about Wisconsin. I guess it's not a point of pride that our state is the one that would revert to the oldest law, the one passed in 1849. But I think about what sort of rights women had in 1849. This is not going to be a history question, don't get worried. But it was passed at a time when there were virtually no rights that women had. And so the only exemption, as you mentioned, was for the life of the mother, not the health of the mother, not any focus on somebody who might have been the victim of rape or incest. And certainly in the mid 1800s, there was no idea of a medication abortion, which you've already touched on. But because we revert to such an ancient statute, I would like to hear what sort of impact an outright repeal of or overturning of Roe versus Wade will have on victims of rape and incest, and what restrictions Wisconsin has already put in place when it comes to medication abortion.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Senator. And first, let me just say you're absolutely right. I mean, this was passed not only well before the 19th Amendment was ratified, but the legislation that would go into effect in Wisconsin was passed before the Civil War. Yes. That's how far back we'd be turning the clock. And part of what to me is so fundamentally unfair about the idea that this old law may go back into effect is that people haven't legislated on the core issues here for almost 2 generations, because Roe has been in place, and that's a protection that people have relied upon as they've made all sorts of critical decisions about the future of their lives. Because the law that we have in Wisconsin is so old, it hasn't accounted for all sorts of different scenarios that will arise in the real world. There was certainly no medication abortion in the middle of the 19th century, but it also hasn't thought through all sorts of other issues that could arise. How that ancient law will apply to the modern reality that people face, unfortunately, is going to be the source of significant confusion that's going to lead to a lot of litigation. And in the meantime, is going to chill people from exercising their rights. With respect to victims of rape and incest, there is no exception under the Wisconsin law that's on the books. What that means is that people who are victims of those serious violent crimes under this law would essentially have to carry a pregnancy to term. They would be forced into labor. Now, we just recently enacted a state constitutional amendment that provides rights to crime victims, Marsy's Law. The idea that after providing this right to be treated with dignity and respect and a right to privacy for victims, that we would turn around and allow a law to go into effect that would force victims of a violent crime to carry a pregnancy to term, that to me is fundamentally inconsistent with, I think, really any notion of freedom and liberty, and is fundamentally inconsistent with our values.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Amen. Let me ask each of our state representatives a question, and then we may be at a point to turn and see if we have questions from the press. But Representative Pittman, in reading about Oklahoma, that Oklahoma, as you said, recently passed legislation that's expected to be more restrictive in terms of it be the most restrictive abortion law in the nation, even stricter than your 1910 law that you would revert back to. Can you talk a little bit more about how this new law would restrict women's freedoms even more than the 1910 law?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for that question. Our new law would restrict abortion at conception. We had a bill that was SB 612. That was a criminal bill, and which made abortions a felony, and it made abortions to perform abortions a felony. But we also had a Heartbeat Act, which was SB 1503, and I'm happy to provide these bill numbers or send them to your staff so that people can see them. But that was the heartbeat bill that would stop abortions at the sign of a heartbeat. Well, now we just recently had one, which was our most strict one, our latest one, that would stop abortions at conception. And that essentially does that. And then it also goes on to allow for civil litigation as well against the provider. And basically the goal of the bill is to give liability to the provider, as well as provide civil litigation to anyone who wants to provide litigation to the provider or to the victim. And so the goal for that bill is to completely ban abortions and to basically say there's no timeline, there is no 2-week, there is no 3-week, there's no heartbeat, there is no nothing. There's nothing for rape or incest in this particular piece of legislation. It is basically you have to carry the child full term, and their abortion is illegal at conception.
It's stunning, actually. It's hard to fathom when you really think about what that means, the implications of that for girls, for women, and so on. It's just really stunning.
It's further stunning to really think that these bills are being authored by women. And that's a lot of what we are seeing in the state of Oklahoma, is that these particular bills that are coming through our legislatures and that are coming through our floors are being authored by other women. And it is very hard to stomach that a woman would take a right from another woman that we had to fight for. We talk about the 19th Amendment that was designed to ensure the rights and freedoms of all women. And we witnessed in a pandemic last year how the pandemic exacerbated housing, food insecurity, mental health providers, and we couldn't even get governmental officials to mandate vaccines to save lives. But now we have women elected officials that are mandating harmful laws to other women in the 21st century. And that is what we are facing, an attack on each other. I almost look at them as the Jane Crow of what the 21st century is, because we know that Black and brown women, Native women, tribal women, women of color, minority women have already been looked at as second-class citizens. Their pain has already been discounted by doctors when they go to their physicians and they say that they are hurting or that they need medicine. And now we take away an additional right to healthcare that they can have, and it is being stripped from them by another woman.
It's scary. It's really frightening, really frightening. Thank you. Representative Weber, so many women today in our country have grown up with the freedom to make their own reproductive decisions. They can't imagine what all of this is happening, all these government regulations and taking away their freedoms and so on. Could you talk a little bit more about how overturning Roe v. Wade would change women's lives?
Yes, definitely. I actually grew up in a very conservative upbringing. So I grew up in an area where it was a Catholic religion, and they believed that abortions were bad. I always say that I'm the black sheep of the family because I grew up very strong pro-choice, very strong supporter of women's reproductive health care, and finally overturned my mother to have a full understanding of why women's reproductive health care matters. So with all that being said, I mean, I grew up in an area where I felt like our reproductive health care was always under attack. I grew up in rural Kansas. One of the abortion providers was gunned down as church in Wichita. So that was kind of the mentality that I've always seen. Now being an elected official, before I was an elected official, I was a Planned Parenthood volunteer, and I was a patient escort with them for years. So I continue to see the attacks on our reproductive health care and live that. Roe being overturned was not, blindly, before I was an elected official. It wasn't something that I thought would ever happen. Now, as an elected official and seeing everything, that was a fear that we all were waiting for, I guess. And so this is going to be very detrimental to women's healthcare and women's lives, because again, abortion was here before Roe and will be here after. It just depends on if this is going to be safe and legal, or are we going to end up murdering more women and children. So at this point, it's going to hurt us. It's going to hurt real bad, and we need to fight like hell to make sure that our reproductive rights are here.
Absolutely. Thank you. And that's why we're here. And really, in the end, as we all know, it really is about who decides these very personal healthcare decisions. Some politicians in Washington or in your state, or do we decide with our faith, our family, our doctor in America? This should be easy. This should be a freedom that's very basic, and it has been for 50 years. But now, because of a very right-wing court and a group of right-wing Republicans, MAGA Republicans, we are where we are. So I'm going to, at this point, for the last few minutes of our discussion, turn it to our communications director, Matt Williams, to see if we have members of the press that would like to ask any questions from us.
Thank you, Senator. We do have a couple of questions in the queue. The first question goes to Laura with Reveal News. Laura, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Laura Morell. I'm a reporter with the Center for Investigative Reporting. This question is for anyone who would like to weigh in. I recently published an investigation that focuses on the rise in anti-abortion violence and harassment targeting abortion providers. As many of you know, these acts will only continue to escalate after Roe v. Wade is gutted at the country's remaining clinics. What measures are you taking or can you take to ensure the safety and security of abortion care providers? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, before opening up to anyone else who wants to respond, let me just say we are very aware of what's happening. We are hearing more and more about people's locations on their phones being tracked and where they're going to, whether it's abortion clinics or other places. And the sort of bounty hunter approach in the States and so on has made it very, very scary. And so we are focused on what we can do to be able to address this. And I'm going to turn it to my colleagues or turn it to members of the panel if someone wants to talk more specifically about that.
Yeah, I will just say a couple of things. One, I want to dovetail on what Senator Stabenow just said about the ability in the digital age to track people's movements and observe where they spend time. And we've raised the alarm in recent weeks, having learned about this, that there are data brokers out there that are selling data that could include individuals' movements to Planned Parenthood clinics or others, including the people who work there. And that's deeply disturbing. And we want to make sure that we get to the bottom of it and put a stop to that. I do think also, this is going to have very different impacts in different states. So as we were sharing our likely Wisconsin experience, there probably will not be any in-state provision of abortion care because the main providers have said they will not expose their physicians to that level of risk of prosecution and imprisonment. We still have the issue that we touched upon in several of the questions relating to medication abortions. And first of all, I think it's really important that we educate on that topic, because I do think there's a lot of voters out there that say, oh, if Roe versus Wade is overturned, it won't affect me because that is the predominant form of abortion care in this particular era. That's not true. It does affect everyone. And I think that it will vary in states as the laws as new laws are passed and as current laws are reviewed, whether it is available at all. And I think we have to focus also on the safety of people whose services are prescription services, as well as those providers of abortion care and comprehensive reproductive care in states that still permit it.
Thank you. I don't know if anyone else wanted to respond. If not, we'll go on to the next question. Did someone want to?
Senator, I can respond real quick. Thank you so much. Here in Missouri, I hate saying this, but there's not a lot that we can do, I don't think. There's, like I said, we have one abortion provider in St. Louis, and the doctor who does the abortions, they have to have security nonstop with them. Gated security at their homes, children's schools, things like that. So this is going to be a tough one because, in all honesty, I believe that the GOP here in Missouri would love to have multiple attacks on abortion providers, on their personal lives and on them. So I think that's what they're looking forward to.
And I'll just briefly touch on it and add to what she said. Here in the state of Oklahoma, we currently don't, and I don't foresee us having anything that protects the providers, because the whole goal is to make sure that the providers are not performing abortions. I know that some of our Republican colleagues are getting pushback on this last bill, HB 4327, because they sent out talking points to each other that says this is not a bounty hunter bill, which means they are getting phone calls. They are getting hearing from their constituents because their constituency is concerned. And we are getting those same phone calls. We are getting that same outcry from our constituents saying, what is going to happen to these providers? And the fact that we now have a bill that allows litigation against providers and litigation from anyone, it sets someone up to be unsafe. It sets them up for people to hunt them down to find evidence for their lawsuit. So even though this bill does not outright say it is a bounty hunter bill, what it does is it provides contacts for you to be able to go hunt someone down and say, oh, I was just getting evidence for my lawsuit or for my civil suit that I now have the right to introduce to the courts based off this new legislation that we have.
I'll just jump in quickly and add that political violence in any form is totally unacceptable. We work through a statewide intelligence center to identify potential threats to Wisconsinites. We also are committed to working with law enforcement agencies and prosecutors wherever we can to hold folks accountable who engage in political violence, whatever their motivation is for doing so. And I would emphasize that this is one of the reasons that a commitment to even-handed justice and to the rule of law and to not politicizing our enforcement efforts is vital, because we need to make sure we are protecting the fundamentals of our democracy, and that includes engaging in robust debate on whatever issue it is that's of concern.
Thank you.
Great. And our next question is Lori with Women's E-News. Lori, go ahead and unmute yourself. Lori, are you still with us? All right, we might have lost Lori. Those were the questions in the queue, Senator. Unless there are any other questions, we can close it out.
Great. Well, thank you again, really, to all of you, and for your courage and your commitment and your dedication. We are your partners here at the federal level, and we know how serious this is. And this is really a fundamental question of whether or not our freedoms are rolled back 50 years or more, or whether we're going to be able to continue to respect and protect our freedoms as women, our freedom to make our own reproductive choices in this country. And so we've got a lot of work to do together. We are very committed to doing that, both in the Senate, whatever we can do directly in the Senate, legislatively, what we can do working with the Biden administration, and ultimately what we can do in November to make sure we have more pro-choice members of Congress and in the state legislature, so that women don't have to worry about all of the things that we've been talking about today. So a lot to do, and we're gonna do it together. Thank you so much.